It's my life, and it's now or never. 'Cause I ain't gonna live forever. I just wanna live my life. It's
Good morning, everyone. 18 minutes after the hour. Welcome back to the Sunrise Show. Craig Fronican, and thrilled to welcome back Terry Jarrett. He's an attorney currently for the Healy Law Offices out of Missouri, but he had a 6-term with the Missouri Public Service Commission and appointed by the Missouri Governor, Matt Blunt, to the Missouri Public Service Commission, and later a member of the National Association of Utility Regulatory Commissioners and on its board of directors, and as chairman of the Committee on Critical Infrastructure, an expert on power and energy throughout the United States. We've had Terry on in the past talking about the EPA and the wind power plant and the definition, well, between that and the coal power. And it's interesting, Terry, that you identified the false narrative of the president by saying that his wind power plan would not work. So anyway, Terry, I want to welcome you onto the program. Thanks so much for tuning in and being with us this morning. And you have to be stunned with the State of the Union address last night with everything that was going on.
Yes. Well, first of all, good morning, Craig. It's good to be with you again. Yes. This clean power plan and this global warming sort of frenzy that the Obama administration has been beating the drums for during his entire administration is just it's very frustrating to folks in the energy business, especially, who know that all of this is just going to cause a lot of pain for this country in higher electricity prices and loss of jobs, disruption to our electric grid. It's really going to cause problems for us down the road.
You know, what's interesting is that they have not built up, the federal government, have not built up the electric grid. You talk about that, the power grid in the United States, and then they punch back and shut down coal-fired power plants. And you're wondering what's going to happen there. And they've made no move whatsoever. And then you think, well, if they do, who would pay for all of this? I mean, it's so lopsided. You end up just scratching your head, right?
That's exactly right. Just to review for your listeners, the Clean Power Plan is an EPA plan to cut carbon emissions 32% by 2030. And the way they do this is by shutting down coal plants and replacing it with renewable energy, wind and solar primarily. And, when you take away that base load generation of coal that we've relied on for 60 years to provide reliable and affordable electricity, and you rely on these, intermittent forms of energy that are, can't supply energy all of the time. You got to have backup generation. You've got to build massive new infrastructure if you're going to increase renewables in this country the way the Clean Power Plan wants to do. And as you said, somebody's got to pay for that, and it's going to be the consumers in the forms of higher energy prices.
Your article that came out December 24th talks about the overreach of the EPA, and 20 states are now preparing to join, a lawsuit against it, saying that it is overreach. It's interesting what the president talked about last night. He said, 7 years ago, we made the single biggest investment in clean energy in our history. Here are the results. In fields from Iowa to Texas, wind power is now cheaper than dirtier conventional power. What would you say to that?
Well, they cook their numbers when they talk like that. Certainly when you have a wind farm that's already up and operating and the wind is blowing, the power is pretty cheap, admittedly.
Right.
But they don't talk about all of the tax subsidies that these wind farms get to actually get built. They don't talk about the construction costs of the wind farms and the transmission lines that are needed, the high voltage transmission lines to get that power where it needs to go. They don't talk about the backup generation that's needed when the wind isn't blowing. That's a cost that has to be added to the mix. So, wind power does cost more because they don't factor in all of these other costs.
So they literally don't count the transmission lines when they're talking about the savings of the wind power versus what President Obama said, dirtier conventional power?
Well, that's exactly right. They what they do is they ignore all of those costs and they just talk about the cost of the wind when the wind turbines are turning. They don't talk about any of the other costs that are associated with it. So, they're being disingenuous when they talk about the cost of wind power, because again, all of these expenses to get the power where it needs to go, and again, the backup generation. You have to talk about that because the wind folks don't want to include that in their cost, but you have to have, coal-fired or natural gas primarily fired plants to run when the coal or when the wind isn't shining, or when, the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. So
Yeah.
It's just amazing that they can just ignore the facts.
So they have to have some type of generation when the wind isn't blowing, like you said. You just, where would that, you can't even begin to think about the cost of what type of generation that would be.
Well, that's exactly right. And with the Clean Power Plan, right now about 5% of our power nationally is generated through wind and solar. The Clean Power Plan by 2030 aims to up that to 28%, from 5% to 28% in 15 years.
Where is that?
That requires a massive undertaking to build all this new infrastructure. I've heard some commentators say that we would have to have enough wind farms that would cover the entire state of New York. That much area for these wind turbines.
Well, and see,
not to mention the high voltage transmission lines, thousands and thousands of miles it would take to move that power where it needs to go. You're talking billions and billions of dollars. I've heard anywhere from $6 to $10 billion cost of compliance to this Clean Power Plan.
So
and everything will have to be paid for by guess who?
I was just going to that's exactly right. And that's where I wanted to get to. We have a break coming up, Terry, but I want to get after that because the EPA, and you're classifying it as an overreach by federal authority, which is perfect because the states are thinking, hey, where are we going to come up with collectively $6 to $10 billion? Ladies and gentlemen, we've got Terry Jarrett with us. He's a former public utility commissioner with the state of Missouri and was on the national level as well. We'll come right back. More on the EPA after this quick break. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. 35 minutes after the hour, it's the Sunrise Show on News Radio 880 KCMX, and we're continuing with Terry Jarrett, a wonderful resource when it comes to energy. He was 6 years on the Missouri Public Utility Commission, and then appointed as chairman of the National Commission on Power. And fantastic when you get to all of that. And we were just discussing that what it takes for the wind power in comparison to the coal plants, and that currently right now the United States is utilizing 5% of its power on wind, and then the Clean Power Plan put out by the president wants to raise it to 28, almost 30% by the year 2030, which you just wonder how that's going to happen. But the shocker is, Terry, you were saying that the cost that would be regulated to the states by the EPA would be anywhere from $6 to $10 billion, best estimate. And now you're saying that upwards of 27 states preparing to join a lawsuit against the EPA overreach. Terry, talk about this a little bit, because Oklahoma Governor Mary Fallin, and you wrote in your piece out in December 24th, Oklahoma Governor Mary Fallin issued an executive order directing her state that will not comply with the overreach of federal authority. But even so, here is this piece from Harvard University constitutional law professor Lawrence Tribe, who says the EPA oversteps federal authority, and he told Congress that.
Yes, exactly. And as you said, there are 27 states now that have signed on to a lawsuit challenging the EPA's authority to put forward this plan. And there's several arguments, obviously legal arguments against it, but one of the main ones is that it does usurp state authority over utility regulation. For the better part of a century, states have regulated the utilities in their states. They have set their own state energy policies. They require their utilities to provide safe, reliable, and affordable electricity to the consumers. They require states to do plans to provide that stretch out to 20-year plans on how they're going to provide electricity reliably and affordably to their consumers. So this is something the states have been doing for almost a century. They've done overall a pretty good job of regulating the energy sector in our country, state by state. And now here comes the EPA, who has no experience at all in energy or the electric grid or operating the electric grid. And they are saying to states, here is what you're going to do as far as how you're going to generate your electricity, and you're going to have to figure out how to do it. We're not going to tell you how to do it because we want to be flexible. But, it's sort of like, you can have the old Henry Ford saying, you can have your Model T in any color as long as it's black.
Exactly.
That's basically what the EPA is saying. You can do whatever you want, but you're going to lower your carbon emissions by such and such percent by this date, and that's final.
What's really amazing, Terry, is you take all of this, the wind power plan, the clean power plan by the EPA and the president, and then the pushing back and shutting down of what he said, this dirtier conventional power. It also said Americans saving tens of millions of dollars on their energy bills and employing more Americans than coal. But my question to you was, on the power grid, there's not been any rebuilding of that. Doesn't that put an immense strain on that? And then if you focus all of your, on the clean energy, which I understand to a certain point, but what about an electromagnetic pulse that as a weapon? I mean, you've got terrorists and things like that. All of this goes into, and no rebuilding, no security. You talk about cybersecurity. Where do you go with that, Terry?
Absolutely. There was a story last week where hackers hacked into the Ukraine's electric grid and actually shut down parts of it. It's really scary what hackers can do, and especially if you get a state actor like a China or Iran that would want to wreak havoc on this country. They could look no farther than our electric grid because it is vulnerable to attack. There's a lot of good people working in this area in the United States to try to bulk up the grid from a cybersecurity standpoint, but it's very hard to stay ahead of these actors out there that want to do harm to us.
It's interesting with the transmission lines, because no matter what you do, whether it's wind, coal, power, you still got to have these transmission lines. Can the wind power, they have to have separate transmission lines than the electric power grid? Is that correct?
Well, they not necessarily separate, but of course, to build these new wind farms, they will have to build new transmission lines to accommodate those, and they are normally they're going to be a lot higher voltage than what you see coming out of coal plants and gas plants and nuclear plants and so forth. So, yeah, a little bit different. And, of course, you've got to build them because the wind areas where wind is strong is so remote. You're talking about places in the western United States, Kansas, South Dakota, North Dakota, northern Minnesota, places where you're going to have to build, thousands of miles of transmission lines to get that power where it needs to go.
It's amazing to me. And then you just kind of wonder, okay, let's just take this a step back. And you wonder, are we doing our due diligence and getting everything in line properly? And it just seems like it's more politically driven. Do you sense that?
Oh, absolutely. It is very politically driven. Clearly, the environmental advocates have had control of this from day one. We know from emails, from Freedom of Information Act requests that the environmental groups were working with the EPA from day one to formulate this clean power plan. They weren't asking energy experts to come in and help promulgate this rule. They were asking the environmental folks to come in and help them. So they've had their fingerprints all over this from the get-go. And again, they have no experience in running the electric grid or generating power for customers or taking care of customers. That's one of the real big problems with this rule. It's not scientifically feasible.
No.
Because it's simply the right experts weren't in the room when they were talking about this. And one other point I would like to make, too, about this dirty conventional fuels.